This is the very beginning of the text. Consider that phrase not as a mere opener, but as a soft chisel tapping at the stone of your ordinary day, producing a faint vibration that asks you to listen for a new tone. In the quiet where a clock's tick and the hum of the city dissolve into something else, there is the possibility of reception, a kind of attention that is both practical and ineffably grand. It is in this liminal space that the message arrives, not necessarily as thunder from a sky god, but as an intimate dispatch from an ancient scribe of the inner cosmos, a rune keeper whose ink is moonlight and whose desk stretches like the horizon. To be chosen to hear this message from Thoth today is not a boast of fate, but an invitation to align your life with a larger tuning fork, to attune your breath, your choices, and your quiet courage to a scale that has measured things since the first stars learned to count. Imagine the moment of selection as a thread pulled from a vast loom, the warp and weft of countless lifetimes or choices, and that thread happens to be your name. There is a practical seam to it. The decisions you make tomorrow will ripple into your small world, your work, your relationships, your sense of purpose, and those ripples meet and recombine with currents that run deeper than habit. But alongside that seam is a hidden architecture, an edifice of meaning that holds up more than social etiquette. There is an almost architectural logic to Thoth's voice, equal parts recorder, mathematician, and magician, who recognizes that symbols are not mere ornaments but structural beams. This is as practical as any ledger. When you record what is true, when you weigh what matters, you build a life that does not collapse under the weather of panic or apathy. There is a paradox in being chosen that merits reflection. Choice implies agency, yet choosing often feels like surrender, a soft, mysterious ascent to something larger. To be chosen by an archetype like Thoth is to be handed a mirror and a map simultaneously. The mirror asks you to see with exacting honesty, to measure the shadows on your face and the contours of the heart behind it. The map asks you where you wish to travel next and how you might navigate by stars that are also metaphors, constellations of memory, of skill, of consequence. In both instruments there is a practicality. Honesty refines relationships. Maps prevent you from walking in circles. Yet both instruments are also metaphysical keys. When you look into the mirror with patience, you discover that reflection is not merely optical, and when you read the map closely you realize it is drawn in the dialect of dreams. Thoth's voice, imagined, felt, or intuited, carries the cadence of a scribe translating the universe into living script. The scribe does not tell you what to do in the way a law prescribes behavior. He records balances and unbalances, illuminates patterns, and reveals errors in the ledger of being. Thus, the message you receive today is part audit and part parable, part calibration and part myth. It is a gentle but exacting reminder that time is not simply linear but layered. The minutes on your watch are nested within cycles of attention, habit, and meaning. Your small acts, an apology you've delayed, a book you finally open, a conversation you avoid no longer, are nodes on a lattice that Thoth understands intimately. The cosmic element is not flamboyance but proportion. In recognizing the right proportion, lives hold, gardens flourish, and systems sustain. Consider the symbol of the ibis, Thoth's familiar, its beak curved like a pen, as if all the world's strange and secret sentences were constantly being transcribed. What does it mean to be the recipient of such transcription? Practically, it asks you to become literate in your own life, to learn the grammar of cause and effect within your habits, the punctuation marks of commitment and release, the syntax of compassion. Beyond this, it asks you to attend to the silence between words, where intuition and dream speak their own script. In the economy of Thoth's temple, both the loud and the hushed are transactional. Notes, promises, and unspoken vows are entered into the great ledger. Nothing is wasted. That sense of small accountability is not punitive, it is empowering. Knowing that every gesture is counted confers a kind of sacred responsibility. to speak kindly, to repair, to show up. But there is more. The message is also a summons to ancient law, Mad, the principle of balance, truth, and cosmic order. To resonate with Mad is not merely to obey. It is to enact alignment so that your personal choices feed rather than fracture the whole. In the realm of daily life, this translates into small acts of integrity that accumulate like stones forming a path. In the realm of spirit, this translates into the cultivation of inner clarity, a discipline of attention that allows you to read signs in the world as if they were the script of your own initiation. The practical and the cosmic are thus braided. To light a candle for clarity is mundane. To understand that the candle is also a way to summon a pattern of clarity that echoes through your relationships, and your work is to occupy the architecture of being. This introduction seeks not merely to astonish or to decorate, but to reframe the everyday as a kind of temple in which one might practice the art of living with precision. The message from Thoth is not some remote edict, but a living instruction manual for embodied wisdom. It activates an inner scriptorium where counting and compassion, measurement and mercy, calculus and care are held in equilibrium. If you accept this invitation, you will find that your days begin to accrue meaning like coins collected in a jar, each small kindness and exact thought adding heft until, at some unexpected morning, you realize your cup is full. Wonder, then, is not an extra. It is the fuel that makes the mechanics of habituation bend toward beauty. To be chosen to hear this message is to be asked to steward that fuel with the quiet artistry of a patient scribe, recording with fidelity and acting with proportion, so that your life might reflect the balance Thoth has always measured. There are pillars beneath the temple of this message, though they are not carved from stone so much as woven from pattern and breath. Imagine for a moment that you stand in a hall lined with mirrors that do not merely reflect but decode. Each reflection reveals not surface likeness but the grammar of causality. These are the guiding ideas that Thoth, in the manner of a cosmic archivist, whispers into the ear of the attentive. That language shapes the world, that measure is moral, that memory is creative, and that balance is active, not passive. To grasp these as mere doctrines would be to mistake map for territory. Rather, they operate as lenses, tools of perception that either narrow into instruments of control when wielded by fear or open into vistas of synthesis when held by clarity. The first guiding pillar, then, is recognition, to see that the shapes we habitually mistake for reality, the solidity of self, the continuity of time, the isolation of events, are often projected scaffolds, convenient illusions produced by a mind that specializes in survival. Thoth's counsel is not to deny these projections, but to learn their grammar, for only by reading the rules can one write new scripts into existence. If recognition is the first pillar, then the second might be called reciprocity in measurement. Thoth teaches that every act of knowing has an ethical weight. The way we measure, name, and count bears consequences beyond the immediate. When you measure a life by productivity, you have summoned a metric that will demand productivity in return. When you count a person by utility, you have invoked a ledger that will find itself balanced through loss. This does not mean measurement is villainous. It means that measurement is sacred. To count with care is to orient your attention toward the equilibrium of things, to understand that numbers and words are strands of the same web. Language is not neutral. It is a technology of reality tuning. Thus, one pillar holds the paradox that precision without compassion becomes tyranny, while compassion without precision collapses into sentimentality. The true praxis is an alchemical marriage of exactness and mercy, where the scientist of the soul calibrates instruments not to dominate but to harmonize. A third pillar concerns memory as a creative force. Thoth, the Lord of records and the mythic writer of gods, invites you to reframe memory from a passive archive to an active loom. Memories are not fixed relics but living threads that, when woven anew, reconfigure the tapestry of your present. This does not imply falsifying the past, but rather recontextualizing it so that its narrative function becomes regenerative rather than binding. Trauma, habit, ancestral injunctions. These are grooves in the mind that run on old scripts. To hear Thoth is to be taught how to translate those scripts, to find the originary clauses and either amend or emancipate them. Memory, then, becomes the site of alchemy, the lead of old pain transmuted into the gold of discernment. In practical terms, this is the work of deliberate remembrance and selective re-education, where rituals of attention and symbolic recomposition serve as the tools of transformation. Underlying these is the pillar of pattern recognition, an insistence that reality is less a stream of isolated moments than a fractal song repeating at different scales. To the uninitiated, life is a sequence of random occurrences. To the initiated, life is a motif echoed in the micro and the macro, the same archetypal notes transposed across relationships, systems, and seasons. Thoth asks you to become attentive to this echo, not as a hobby but as a method. This does not mean retreating into symbolic fantasy, but engaging a disciplined seeing that notices correspondences. The way a personal conflict mirrors climate stress, the way a city's architecture reflects a culture's cosmology, the way dream imagery rhymes with economic trends. Pattern recognition is a pragmatic metaphysics. It allows for prediction only insofar as prediction is an ethical instrument for shaping outcomes. Here again, truth is not a static trophy, but a functional insight that changes how you live. There is also the pillar of silence and translation, an admonition against the rush to speak what has not been measured inwardly. Thoth, being both scribe and mediator, knows the danger of utterances cast without listening. Noise proliferates illusions. Silence allows form to reveal itself, but silence alone is not the point. The silence is a preparatory chamber. Its purpose is to attune you to the right cadence when you do speak. Translation, then, becomes the field where inner knowing and outer expression are negotiated. To translate is to bring what is subtle into language without flattening it, to render myth into method, vision into vehicle. It is a practice of fidelity, where one seeks to keep the hues of nuance intact while making them useful to another. The ethics here are clear: speak precisely, translate lovingly, and accept that some truths must remain in the language of symbol even as their effects ripple into the literal. Finally, perhaps the most subversive pillar is the insistence that freedom is a format of responsibility. Thoth's message reframes liberation not as escape from laws but as sovereignty within them. There are universal invariants, reciprocity, consequence, pattern, symmetry, that cannot be circumvented without cost. The path to freedom is not found in pretending these do not exist, but in learning the grammar so thoroughly that one can compose within it. This is not resignation. It is empowerment by comprehension. When you accept that freedom requires apprenticeship to cosmic forms, you move from rebellion to mastery. The deeper truth revealed here is paradoxical. Obedience to principle breeds the greatest range of legitimate action. Power, when informed by balance and memory and the ethics of language, becomes creative rather than coercive. All of these pillars converge into a single, practical proposition: that metaphysics is operational. The loftiest insights of Thoth's library are not mere metaphors for consolation. They are instruments for redesigning day-to-day reality. The distinction between illusion and truth is not always about factuality, but about effect. What patterns we encourage by our attention, what realities we instantiate by our speech, where we place our ledger of value. To be chosen to hear this message is to be handed a set of lenses and an instruction manual written in parable and number. How you use them determines whether they become instruments of liberation or new masks for old avoidance. The core concepts, then, are at once philosophical and intimate. Learn to see your projections, measure with reciprocity, make memory malleable, map patterns across scales, cultivate silence to translate, and embrace responsibility as the currency of freedom. In these ideas, the architecture of being becomes legible, and you, as reader and scribe, are invited to walk its corridors with both curiosity and exactness. Listen, then, to the parables that Thoth would teach in that hush between breaths, when the architecture of the world opens like a book and the letters are alive with light. These are not simple fables for children. They are laboratory experiments in story form, precise instruments shaped to shift perception. Each tale folds into the next, and together they form a mosaic of instruction, a map of the inner weather that underlies outer events. Hear them as verbs rather than nouns, as invitations to act upon being rather than mere consolations. There was once a scribe who lived at the edge of a desert of silence. He inherited from his teacher a single, unfinished word carved into a slat of ancient wood. No one knew what the word had been intended to finish. It ended mid-breath, as if the sentence had been interrupted by a wind that carried secrets. The scribe, faithful to the law of memory and obedience to principle, made it his life's work to learn all the possible endings. He did not copy other words mindlessly. He listened to the cadence of the town, to the honest rhythm of wood and sun, to the silent punctuation left by stones. Sometimes he finished the word with gentleness, and the world where he walked softened. Sometimes he completed it in anger, and bridges burned in the valley beyond. One day a child asked him, "Why do you keep finishing it at all? Why not leave the word open, free to mean anything?" The scribe smiled as though a ripple had crossed a lake and said, "Because a word unclaimed is like a seed that rots. To name is to take responsibility. To speak is to plant a forest. If I do not choose, something else will choose for me." In obeying the principle of careful speech, he birthed freedom that was not license but skill, the art of choosing endings that serve life. The lesson here is slender and precise. Language is a lever. It can lift or topple, and where you place it will determine what moves in the house of reality. Far beyond the scribe's town, in a city of mirrors that reflected not appearances but histories, lived a weaver who worked with threads of echo. She did not spin cloth in the ordinary sense. She wove patterns that determined how people returned to one another, how favors folded into debts, how laughter ricocheted until it became a tradition. People brought her spools labeled regret, grace, fear, and joy, and she threaded them through a loom that hummed like a distant constellation. If she threaded with balance, reciprocity rippled outward and the city grew generous. If she favored certain hues, entire neighborhoods became indebted to that tone and lost their capacity to change. When asked how she could know which pattern was right, she answered that patterns are nested and fractal. A kindness in the hand corresponds to a kindness in the mind and echoes upward to tide the nation. She would tune the loom by listening to a river's frequency and to the way an old woman's hands trembled when she forgave. The weaver taught that reciprocity is a mathematical art, a sacred accounting where action and response must be kept in careful register. When one piece of the tapestry is mended, the whole fabric flexes toward coherence. This story asks you to consider your own threads. Where do you repair? Where do you tear? And which pattern are you harboring that will determine not only your day but the next century? Near the rise of a mountain that remembers dawn before it feels the sun, there was a lake so deep that it held futures as if they were seashells. Locals called it the lake that remembers tomorrow. People would come to gaze into its black surface in times of decision, thinking the mirror would show them fate. Instead, the lake showed them memory made malleable. When a young woman peered in, she saw not a single fixed future but a montage of the selves she had made in moments of choice. Each image was a possible memory, an archive of what might be remembered. She stepped closer, understanding then that her attention was the paddle that moved the water and rearranged which scenes would rise to the surface and which would sink. The lake taught that memory is not a vault but a workshop. We polish certain recollections until they become the rod by which the present is measured. If you cherish memories of powerlessness, you will navigate the world as if anchored. If you cultivate memories of agency, however small, you create arcs for yourself that bend toward empowerment. Thoth's whisper here is blunt. To be chosen is to be given tools to re-arch your remembrance, to hammer and reshape what habits of mind you will carry forward. It is not dishonest revision. It is the practical ethics of which recollections we feed and which we starve, understanding that a life is an edited book. And finally, there is the tale of a solitary ibis who once decided to choose the night. Unlike the other ibis that rose with the sun to count the new day's tokens, this bird loved the grammar of shadows. It learned to read the constellations by how darkness bent around them, and to speak in the language of soft claws touching old stones. This ibis apprenticed to the cosmic forms instead of rebelling against them. Rather than defy the patterns of migration, it studied wind and current until it became master of unexpected routes. People watching saw a bird that seemed to appear by will alone, as if it had learned to be at the right place not by chance, but by geometry of purpose. The ibis taught those who observed that obedience to principle, not slavish conformity, but learning the rules of the sky, yields a liberty that is wider than lawlessness. Mastery, in these terms, is not the annihilation of constraint, but the translation of constraint into instrument. The choice to be an apprentice to structure, paradoxically, expands what you may legitimately do. Each story is a living geometry. They are myths but also machine parts, a scribe's shuttered word that asks you to govern speech, a loom that counsels ethical reciprocity, a lake that hands you the scalpel of memory, and an ibis that shows mastery via principled apprenticeship. Taken together, they are a single, braided parable of what it means to have been chosen by Thoth's message. The message does not flatter, it charges. It says, "You are now in possession of metaphors made operative. Each allegory shows an axis upon which your inner mechanics turn, and if you align these axles, language, reciprocity, memory, and disciplined apprenticeship, you will find that the corridors of being open more readily, that doors respond to a hand that understands how hinges work. To be chosen is to inherit stories that are not for passive amusement, but for active engineering. Read them as blueprints and watch how your hands begin to build. When the myths hand you tools, they do not expect you to keep them on a shelf as curiosities. They expect you to take them into your palms and learn their weight. The scribe's shuttered word becomes a practice of speaking with economy and precision in a world that prizes volume over meaning. In the humdrum of morning conversation and the blunt theater of email, choose one sentence to be clean and true. Let it be the hinge upon which a weary exchange swings toward clarity rather than confusion. This begins simply. Pause before releasing speech as if you were handing a tablet to an altar, and ask whether what you will say repairs or corrodes the space between hearts. The practice does not demand silence as a virtue, but reverence for language as instrument. Over weeks, the habit of measured utterance shapes your life the way a chisel shapes stone, removing only what must go until form appears. If reciprocity is a loom, then your daily relationships are threads threaded through time. Consider the small economies you keep with others as a patterning, not a balance sheet. Responding to a friend's vulnerability is not merely kindness. It is the act of adding a strand of integrity to a wider fabric. When you pay attention to what you take and what you return, time for time, tenderness for trust, you transform transactions into tapestries. This has immediate, mundane implications. Show up for the meeting you agreed to, answer the text that carries a small emergency, apologize when your absence has been felt. These are not moral homework. They are structural repairs that prevent more expensive collapse. Over months, fidelity to small returns makes you someone whose promises bear gravity, and that gravity opens doors previously sealed by flimsiness. Memory, the lake that offers a scalpel, invites a practice of intentional retrieval. The ancients taught memory as architecture, Build a house for your recollections and visit its rooms with discipline. Keep a daily ledger of impressions, an evening jotting of 2 moments that mattered, or turn your mornings into a short pilgrimage of recall, letting the lake's surface reveal one thing you would prefer not to forget. Use this recovered material not as nostalgia but as compost for growth. Unprocessed recollection tends to become a ghost. Named, examined, and placed in a narrative, memory becomes fuel for wiser choices. There is also the direct, pragmatic work of tending wounds. When old grievances flare, treat them like sediment stirred in the lake. Examine what is real, what is projection, and what lesson is lodged there. This is the slow practice of repair. Sometimes the scalpel must remove a splinter, sometimes it must trace a map to a different shore. The ibis taught that mastery comes from learning the rules, not discarding them, and here the classroom is your daily life. Apprenticeship is available not only to those who can enter guild halls, but to anyone willing to be small in order to grow. Commit to a disciplined practice of 20 minutes a day toward a skill that matters to you. Writing a paragraph, tuning a musical phrase, practicing an aspect of your trade. Time boxing becomes sacred geometry. The constraint of a brief, repeated window forces attention into a vector and refines motion. Seek an older hand to watch your work, to point out where your technique leaks away. Learning in public, letting trusted eyes see early failures, shortens the arc from stumbling to fluency. This is practical and humbling. The world rarely rewards grand talent without patient, stubborn craft. Let your apprenticeship be visible. Mentors and communities will gravitate towards someone who shows up with tools and a willingness to sweat. Translate the metaphor of governance into practical boundaries that serve freedom. The ancients knew that a city without walls is not free but exposed. Walls are instruments of order. Deliberately choose what you will defend and what you will let pass. Say no to projects that hollow you, and guard time for the practices that build you. Use calendars not as prisons, but as altars that consecrate hours to attention. Mark blocks for undistracted work. Mark blocks for rest as if they were meetings with a sacred presence. Resize expectation by setting limits on technology. Let notifications be servants, not masters, and simplify decisions by developing a few clear principles for how you accept invitations, spend money, and engage online. Boundaries, when named and kept, produce a roomy interior life. They do not constrict your essence, they give it architecture. The myths also demand ritual, small consecrations that transmute ordinary acts into vehicles of attention. Morning rituals need not be elaborate. A single breath held with intention, a cup of water received with gratitude, a short statement of purpose brushed into ink on a page each becomes a sigil that orients your day. In the evening, an inventory calmed on paper closes the circuits of action and teaches you the economy of accountability. When you treat ordinary rhythms as liturgy, the friction of decision dissolves and meaning accrues like patina. Work tasks become a sequence of offerings, relationships become ongoing vows, and even the mundane practice of tidying becomes a form of devotion to the integrity of your space. There is an ethical edge to every everyday adaptation. Thoth's message charges you to be a steward rather than a consumer of meaning. This practical stewardship shows in how you handle money, reputation, and influence. Make small fiduciary vows. Pay what you owe promptly. Invest time in relationships without counting returns. Return borrowed things with more care than you received them. And notice how these microethics compound into trustworthiness. Influence is a kind of sacred currency. Spend it where it fertilizes lives rather than where it feeds vanity. In workplaces, translate reciprocity into policies that honor labor. In families, translate memory into rituals that carry lineage. The practical implications are slow and systemic, but they ground the luminous into the world of bread and roofs. Finally, weave the myths into your public speech and your private practice through translation rather than imitation. Create artifacts, letters, notebooks, recordings that articulate the principles you choose to live by, and share them as invitations rather than proclamations. Teach someone a technique you have refined. Ask a younger person to teach you a piece of their craft. Let the signal you send into the world be one of repair and construction. In these small, repeated acts, honest words, measured returns, curated memory, disciplined apprenticeship, well-placed boundaries, you convert cosmic metaphor into the scaffolding of a life. The chosen life, then, is less a spectacle and more a series of faithful engineering choices. Think like a scribe, weave like a loom, remember like a lake, practice like an ibis, and you will find that the grand architecture of myth alters the fabric of your days. You have been given a hinge, invisible yet heavy with possibility, and now the work is to swing your life through it with care. If the earlier passages were lanterns held out across different rooms, the theory, the symbols, the stories, the small crafts of living, then this final moment is the corridor that joins them, tiles warmed by footfalls, frescoes that only reveal themselves when you stop to breathe. Hear this as both invitation and instruction. To receive a message is not simply to be informed, but to be altered. Thoth's voice, whether imagined as the whisper of an ibis over the Nile or the quiet clarity of a recording pen, is a call toward an integrity of attention. It asks you to answer, not with spectacle, but with an ongoing fidelity to truth, memory, and careful action. Begin gently by letting the idea of being chosen sink soft as ink into paper. Choice is not a crown placed upon a brow. It is a tool placed in your hands. Like the scribe who learns 1,000 strokes until an alphabet becomes muscle memory, you are entrusted with techniques. The practice of noticing, the habit of naming, the willingness to sit with paradox without hasty rescue. This is not a command to perform, but a series of invitations to shape inner architecture. Ask yourself, in a voice as patient as a temple bell, what structures inside you are ready to be rewritten? Where do your agreements still bind you to patterns you no longer intend? Which stories preserve you, and which keep you from becoming more useful to those who will follow? Let the metaphors we have walked together act as tools, not talismans. The lake of memory is not only for looking into, it is for learning to skim its surface without drowning in nostalgia. The loom is not a shrine you must bow to, but an apparatus that accepts hands and grows fabric. The ibis teaches not because it is holy in itself, but because its methodology, attention, repetition, gentle precision, yields results. Translate myth into mechanism. If Thoth taught the measurement of time, then you are asked to measure how you spend it, not with anxiety but with stewardship. If he illuminated the scales of justice, learn the small accounts you can balance today: a reconciliatory call, a corrected invoice, an apology where one is due. Stewardship is not austere, it is exceedingly creative. It asks you to compose a life whose margins hold room for wonder. I want you to understand that transformation does not arrive in a single lightning event, though it often feels ordained that way in hindsight. It is compound interest applied to the soul. Tiny vows kept daily accrue into a character that astonishes even the one who made it. Consider the slow accumulation of trust when you become a person who remembers names, returns borrowed books, shows up when promised, and insists upon clarity in speech. These are allegiances of small currency that buy you a place in the architectures of other lives. Through such exchanges, the myth becomes infrastructure. The allegory becomes a bridge you and others cross toward calmer, more luminous ground. There is also the necessary humility of the chosen. Thoth, the master scribe, balanced cosmic law with the mundane acts of keeping records. You will need the same humility. Do not mistake the feeling of being singled out for some spectacular destiny with immunity to everyday obligations. The work of awakening is ordinary. Sort your correspondence. Plant one seed in the neighborhood garden. Teach a child the cadence of a poem. Clear a family heirloom for someone who cannot speak for themselves. These acts are not beneath grand spiritual aims. They are the way the great aims are realized. Real power, in the sense Thoth would recognize, is the steady power of one who keeps accounts, who honors promises, who reads the ledger of consequence and responds accordingly. In the quiet hours, when the world is a delicately balanced set of possibilities, return to your page. Writing is a sacrament to Thoth for those who cannot shape bronze tablets. Put words where your fears reside and let them become less dangerous. Ask questions of your inner architecture with the same clarity you would ask a wise elder. Where are you stingy, and where are you careless? Whom do you protect with gossip, and whom do you abandon to convenience? These questions are not meant to shame, but to map. They reveal the contours of your moral geography so you can walk it differently tomorrow. Finally, carry this message outward with discretion and generosity. Do not turn wisdom into ammunition or status. Let it be a service. Offer the techniques you have learned as gifts, not demonstrations. Be the person who knows how to keep silence when silence heals and to speak when speech rebuilds what silence has eroded. In public life, advocate for systems that remember, archives that preserve, contracts that honor, institutions that are accountable. In private life, be the relative who listens for the unsaid, the friend who returns what was entrusted to them, the neighbor who tends to the stairs when they wobble. Your influence need not swell, it need only be steady. Over time, steadiness rearranges the lives that inhabit your sphere, like patient water sculpting stones into a new shape. This is the paradoxical liberation Thoth offers. To be chosen is to assume responsibility. To be entrusted is to take delight in the ordinary. The architecture of myth does not insist on spectacle. It insists on fidelity. If you want a ritual to begin with, let it be the ritual of everyday rectitude paired with contemplative depth. Keep a small book, a ledger of promises and gratitude. Record 3 things you repaired, material or relational, before sleep. This will not create cosmic fireworks every night, but it will train your heart and hands to recognize repair as sacred labor. When you find yourself wavering, return to the image of the ibis poised at dawn, measuring the shallow waters with patient beak, not because of divinity, but because such a method yields food. Let that be your tabernacle, method married to meaning. And when your life finally bends toward a more harmonious architecture, do not be attached to the form it takes. The scribe is proud of the work but not possessive of the words. Offer your life as testimony to the practice, and leave space for others to tell their versions of the same story. You were chosen not to be honored but to be used by the world in the way a well-crafted tool is used, repeatedly, faithfully, with hands that know how to hold it without crushing it. This message is not an endpoint but a hinge and a home. Go then, with hands ready to write, fingers willing to weave, eyes attuned to the small balances that make justice possible. Keep turning the pages, keeping the accounts, and in the economy of souls, the quiet economies you tend will repay you with a life that is both ordinary and luminous.